Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 1 of the Workflow Podcast. My name is Steve Glaveski, as you probably ascertained from the intro track, and I will be your host. So, before we get into the Workflow Podcast, this is the Workflow Podcast. I guess we've already gotten into it. I wanted to just share a little bit about myself and how I came to be hosting a show about productivity and high performance at work. I like to tell people that my mission is really to unlock people's potential to create more impact in the world, to do more fulfilling work and lead more fulfilling lives. And I've been doing that over the past almost a decade now in various guises. My main thing really has been Collective Campus, which is a corporate innovation and startup accelerator that I founded back in early 2015 now. And that has empowered me, or really given me the opportunity, and something that I'm really grateful for, to work with all sorts of large companies as well as startups all over the world. We've run countless startup accelerator programs. We've consulted to large Fortune 500 companies. We have run training programs, workshops, hackathons, you name it, with companies like Microsoft, MetLife, Lufthansa, Clifford Chance, Slaughter and May. The list goes on and on and on. And during that same time period, I've spun off a few other companies which are about helping, say, kids unlock their potential. It's a program called Lemonade Stand, which was an entrepreneurship program I ran for a few years as a side project, and we put through several thousand kids through that program, some as young as 7 years old, really to help them think more like entrepreneurs in a world that is fast and forever changing. I spun off a company called No Filter Media a couple of years ago, actually about 14 months ago during the pandemic. I spun off that media network, which is still running, and it is home to a number of podcasts, so you can check that out at your own leisure. And I am the author of a handful of books, 5 books, 2 of which were published by Wiley. Most recently, I released a book called Time Rich: Do Your Best Work, Live Your Best Life, which is really the foundation for this show. And previously, I released a book through Wiley called Employee to Entrepreneur, which the name, I hope at least, from a marketing perspective, speaks for itself. Now, I wasn't always an entrepreneur. Prior to that, I spent almost a decade in various corporate roles with the likes of Ernst & Young, KPMG, Macquarie Bank, which is Australia's largest investment bank, Dun & Bradstreet, and Westpac, were really the big 5 corporate companies that I worked for before jumping out, bouncing out, just spreading my wings and flying and doing my own thing, I guess, because I guess in the corporate world, and this is not to say anything about corporate roles, it just was not for me. And I found myself, despite the fact that I had the 6-figure salary, the business class flights, I enjoyed corporate junkets and all that sort of stuff, which was fun at the time. I mean, I was in my late 20s when I decided to leave that world. I just found myself miserably comfortable. And ever since, I've been looking for ways to really get more fulfillment out of work. And that firstly led me to found a company called Hotdesk. That was my first real crack at entrepreneurship out of the corporate world. I raised some seed capital for that, and after 2 years, I basically had to close the gate. Now, Hotdesk was basically an office sharing platform, kind of like an Airbnb for office space, if you will, and building the demand was much more difficult than building the supply side. So had thousands of locations on there across Asia Pacific, but not so many bums on seats, as you will. And I'd like to take solace in the fact that since then, many such platforms have come along, some of which are incredibly well venture-backed in terms of they've raised tens and tens of millions of dollars, in some cases I believe over $100 million, and are still struggling to crack that nut. And given that I had raised only $150,000, I'm going to say I did the very best I could with that. But that really led me to found Collective Campus, to really bridge the two worlds that I had spent time in, entrepreneurship and the corporate world, and help corporates learn about all these techniques and tools and whatnot that I had been learning about in the entrepreneurial world, which kind of evolved into running startup accelerators and all the rest of it. But again, Collective Campus, within the space of 15 months, we got that to a seven-figure business. We were named one of Australia's fastest growing companies in the Australian Financial Review. We worked with all sorts of great companies. But my average day was typically 8 a.m. till 7 or 8 p.m., almost 12-hour workdays. And so again, I did find myself not really feeling all that fulfilled. It came down to not having enough time for health, for personal relationships, to pursue interests. And also, I think a big part of it was using work as a socially validated activity to keep me from actually getting out of my comfort zone, because it was something that I was somewhat good at. And so spending 12 hours a day behind the laptop screen was a lot easier than me going out, meeting people, pursuing different interests, picking up new hobbies that might be difficult at first, working on those difficult relationships in my life. And so I took advantage of the fact that I was building this company and started to test different ways of working. And I read everything I could. I experimented with everything I could. And the culmination of that was a 5 to 6 hour day work culture that I wrote about for Harvard Business Review back in late 2018 in an article called The Case for the 6-Hour Workday. Now that article went viral. It was covered in the Wall Street Journal and numerous other publications around the world. And that paved the way for Time Rich, my most recent book. And it also paved the way for me to really hone in on where I think I can deliver and create the most value for people, and at the same time find work way more fulfilling. Since Time Rich came out, I've been fortunate enough to speak at South by Southwest. That was one of the more popular shows at their 2020, one of the more popular tickets at their 2021 installment of the conference, with about 350 odd people signing up and attending that particular talk. And on the back of the book and that talk, I've also been working with a lot of companies around the world on productivity and high performance, helping them optimize their culture, and helping individuals optimize their own time at work, because time is something that so many of us waste. Per the intro track, Seneca famously said that time is the one thing we won't get back, yet we give it away like we are in just... We have an abundance of time, and that it just recreates itself somehow, but it's just not the case. And when I look at some of the workplace stress statistics, about 50% of people across Europe and Australia suffer from extreme workplace stress. In the United States, the number can be as high as 80%. And I think this comes down to the way we work. It comes down to a lack of autonomy and control at work. It comes down to treating work like it is still a factory room floor during the Industrial Revolution, and that you could draw a straight line between hours and output, presence and productivity. But the reality is, nowadays we're doing knowledge work. And when you're doing knowledge work, you can really only get into that space of deep work, what Cal Newport calls deep work, that space of flow, for maybe 4 or 5 hours a day. And if you do that, you could get a hell of a lot of awesome work done. But most people are lucky to get 20 continuous minutes of uninterrupted time, because we're checking our phones every 5 minutes. We're checking email every 6 minutes. We're being tapped on the shoulder if we're working in an office. We're constantly fielding back-to-back Zoom calls. We're trying to get to inbox zero. There are so many things that get in the way of us, whether it is external to us or whether it is intrinsic to us and our ingrained and learned habits. And all of these things can keep us busy all day long, all week long, all month long, but then have very little to show for it come the end of the week, day, week, or month, except we feel exhausted, stressed, and we're no closer to our goals. And we're just living for the weekend and looking forward to that holiday, right? So in my work, I have seen so much low-hanging fruit when it comes to helping people achieve more with their time, and not only achieve more to get closer to their goals, but achieve more in less time. So you can liberate time to go and pursue those interests that you've long forgotten, to go and pursue new interests, to spend more time with your family, with your friends, to take care of your health, your physical health, your mental health. And so this show is really for anyone who wants to get better at work. Like anyone from the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, right down to middle management, right down to startup founders, entrepreneurs, right down to the freelancer who is scoring gigs on Upwork. Like absolutely anybody and everybody who is in some way, shape, or form a knowledge worker and does work behind a computer, or at least does some of their work or a significant amount of their work behind a computer. So we will look at what you can do as an individual to optimize your time, whether working solo or as part of a team, but we'll also be diving into things like how to build an optimal workplace culture. We'll be looking at how to build a better workflow when it comes to, say, a team of 5 or 10 people working on a project. We'll be covering all sorts of things in this show, and I will be trying to break things down into series of episodes where possible, just so that way it's a little bit more, I suppose it's a little bit more streamlined and digestible rather than just hop, skip, and jumping all over the place. So what you'll get out of this show is ultimately the ability, I hope, to get more done in less time and live a much fuller life. And when it comes to building that workflow as part of a team, or even as an individual, I think a couple of words on flow, and the title of this show probably prudent right now. So flow, I guess, has many meanings. Now, in terms of this show, workflow, one is all about how we go about getting things done. And so we will obviously be touching on tools, techniques, practices, all sorts of stuff in the show to help you optimize how you get done. So things like automation, outsourcing, prioritization, asynchronous communication, collaboration tools, software, you name it, we're going to be touching on all that sort of stuff. But then the second type of flow, which is the flow state, coined by the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi back in the 1970s, obviously in the management literature nowadays, which is all about that psychological or that physiological state we get to where we're completely immersed by the task at hand, and the rest of the world seems to fade away. And McKinsey found that we're up to 5 times more productive when we are in flow. But when we get interrupted, it takes us about 23 minutes to get back into flow, according to a researcher by the name of Gloria Mark. So if we're checking email every 6 minutes, if we're task switching every 40 seconds or screen switching every 40 seconds, which is the actual average nowadays, we're spending little to no time in flow at all. And then the third type of flow really is to flow like water, the yin and the yang, the work-life balance, the doing work that aligns with your strengths, with your passion, with your purpose, stuff that really gets you out of bed in the morning with a spring in your step. Work should feel more like that rather than something that feels like you're pushing a boulder uphill and pulling your hair out. So there will be a slightly philosophical or spiritual bent to a lot of this stuff, because ultimately nobody lay on their deathbed saying, I wish I worked longer or I wish I worked harder. Bronnie Ware, an Australian palliative care nurse, wrote a great book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And one of those regrets was, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Because ultimately we can work smarter and we can work better, and we can also cultivate more time for stuff that goes on outside of the walls of work, otherwise known as life. So I'm excited to get into this show. We're going to be covering a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to be looking at things through the scientific lens. I'll be unpacking countless studies. I'll also be looking at things through the anecdotal lens, both my own personal experience, the experience of my clients, as well as the experience of other companies who are sharing and documenting their own journeys with productivity and performance at work. It really is about moving away from this culture of busy as a badge of honor towards one where we are actually truly fulfilled at work, and it's not coming at a cost of our fulfillment in our personal lives as well. And so with that, this very first series that I'm going to be covering on the Workflow podcast will be all about the foundations of high performance. You know, the type of work you do, the strengths alignment piece, the values alignment piece, the physical optimization. Like, there's so much that goes into that. And I'm excited to be bringing you that first series. I'm not sure how long a series will be. Maybe it'll be 5 episodes, maybe 10, maybe 20. We'll just see how we go. As things tend to be, once you get started on something, you go down rabbit holes, and what you thought might be 5 episodes ends up being 25 episodes. And that's okay, because as long as I think there is value to what I'm saying, I will be bringing you those episodes. And of course, if you do want to connect with me, you can find me at steveglaveski.com. And you can find all sorts of resources over there, several hundred articles. You can find several hundred podcast episodes. That's something I neglected to mention earlier on. I also host a Future Squared podcast, which is about 403 episodes strong. I've interviewed everybody on there, from Kevin Kelly to Adam Grant to Gretchen Rubin to Annie Duke to Tyler Cowen, you name it, over the past 5 years or so. And I am kind of bringing that podcast to a close just because I've decided to reassign my time to this show. And I also felt that I got to a point where I was done doing interviews. I felt like I had learned a hell of a lot, and the time investment to keep doing that show really wasn't aligned with the return on investment that I was getting anymore. And I think that's something that we'll cover in this show. Like, why are you doing things? Are you getting the benefit, or are you just doing it because you've always done it, or you've always done it that way? And these are sort of fallacies that we fall into. You know, we anchor to the past. We do things because it keeps us, or it lulls us into a sense that we're being productive members of society, when really we're just wasting time. You know, there's so much that goes into this topic of high performance at work. And that's why I've started this show, and it's why I'm really excited to be bringing you this first series. So, yeah, steveglaveski.com. Head there for all the blog posts, all the podcast episodes, about several ebooks, one of which is called 100 Productivity Hacks, which you can download absolutely free. And you can also find a link to my online course there called Time Rich, which is all about productivity and performance at work. And I think that's enough from me for this introductory first episode. Let's bring this one to a close, and I will see you. Well, I won't see you, but you'll hear from me for episode number 2, I hope, providing I've done a good enough job with episode number 1 to keep you coming back for episode number 2. Till next time, peace.